Hey guys, Murat here, and I'm here to talk shortly about the Steam controller and whether or not it's worth a shit. Stay tuned and find out. Alright guys, here it is, the Steam controller. Went and got some Dunkin' real quick. Hey, there's the new PS3, some glasses, my keyboard. Alright, so looking at this Steam controller here. Here's the intro box. It's like a little beat up, but not too bad. Bring it out here. Here's the sleeve. See here, really nice click. It's got this gloss finish on it. Immediately it feels kind of cheap, but I mean, it is what it is. Here is the back of it. Here's those paddle triggers I was talking about, one on each side. Down here there is the this is to release the battery cover, which is this. Up here is your USB micro plug-in, mini actually. And then, as you can tell, this is what I was talking about when the buttons feel a little small. And then, very clicky haptic feedback type of deal. Not terrible feeling. Check in the box, Duracell right here. If you look over here, actually, I already have this set up, the receiver. Bottom of the box, stuff in there, quick start, blah, blah, blah. Don't care, men don't read manuals. So right off the bat, I want to say packaging is pretty nice so far. It's a lot better than I get when I got my DS4. I guess it's somewhat similar, somewhat comparable, which is going to be the main comparison point here. This is simply a short-term review in which I will pit it against my long-term computer use controller, which is a Sony PlayStation DualShock 4. Now, right off the bat, I would say the packaging experience is not bad at all. Upon opening the box, you get this nice, what looks like a molded foam to hold the controller in place. It comes with a 2-pack of Duracell batteries. Very nice. Your USB dongle, what appears to be a receiver and a pass-through, which is actually pretty nice, and a fairly lengthy USB cable. It's fairly lengthy. I'd say it's nothing too crazy. About a 3-foot cable, pretty standard. I take back that fairly lengthy part. If you do PC game or you don't like playing wirelessly, I would suggest investing in a long 10-foot USB cable. This is USB to a micro USB plug-in, not a USB-C, mind you. Yeah, that is a USB micro plug-in. Typical controller setup guide, quick start guide here, and right off the bat, seems not bad. There are multiple inputs here. The D-pad, so to speak, on both sides of the controller are they're concave, so to speak. They kind of sink in towards the middle. They got a nice click to them. However, you can definitely feel it to the controller. It's not very isolated, much like something like a 360 would have, as opposed to the DualShock 4, which nothing on the DualShock 4 has a heavy click besides the L3 and the R3 clicks. Everything else is very soft on this controller, but I suppose that's kind of the point. Comparing the weight of the two, they are very similar. However, I would say that I think the Steam controller is a little lighter. It does feel a little cheaper, but I think that's due to the piano gloss finish on the front fascia, and it's just it's interesting. So it has a bit of an interesting hold pattern. The way your hands want to naturally grip a controller don't quite fall in here. It feels like this controller is more so meant to rest on your fingers than in your palms, much like I do. It's not entirely uncomfortable, it's just not something that find myself naturally gravitating towards. There are your typical buttons, one analog stick down on the bottom right, your D-pad, your left and right D-pad circles, so to speak, X, B, Y, A layout, a Steam button flanked by, on either side by 2 start buttons, it looks like, 2 shoulder buttons, 2 trigger buttons, which I will say feel very nice. The shoulder buttons feel much like the bumpers on an Xbox controller. Very similar mechanisms. They feel just about as you would expect. They're not quite easy to press down, but they're not hard to press down. They have a nice feel to them, or somewhere you would not accidentally press them down. The triggers are nice. They bottom out with a nice tactical bump. I have yet to see or test whether or not these indeed have an actuation point, or they activate as you put them down, or if you have to hit that bump. Because if you're familiar with the DualShock 4 or even the DualShock 3, you know that you don't have to fully actuate the L2 and the R2 buttons in order to get an input from them. And what's unique to this controller is underneath where your fingers rest, your middle and your ring fingers would likely be resting, there are an additional set of buttons both on the left and the right by the grips. I think that's a nice feature. It's natural. When I place my hands on the controller, they want to naturally just they naturally rest in this position. One thing I will say about this controller is I don't feel that I'm unnaturally reaching for anything on it. However, except for the middle buttons, they're a bit of a stretch due to the way that the grips are laid out. First impressions, yeah. It feels a little light. I don't know. I wouldn't call it premium, but I wouldn't call it cheap. And I did get it for $5 on sale, so there's also that. Looking at it at the original price point of $60, I'm not sure, but at $5, absolutely. Now, compared to the DualShock, I'll hold the DualShock in my hand now. The DualShock feels more complete, more sturdy. They both have a similar... They don't flex. I will say the DualShock controller, you can kind of twist it and flex it a little bit. The Steam controller is very rigid. It almost has no flex to it, which I very much like. It's almost like a medium in between. If an Xbox controller and a DualShock 4 had a baby, you would end up with this controller. Is kind of what it feels like. But maybe the baby didn't get enough air on the way out, and never mind. But going back to what I was saying, the one thing I never did like about the new triggers, the L2 and the R2 and the new DualShock 4, is there's no tactical feedback. They're just kind of mushy. So that's one thing I will say I appreciate, and I do really like that addition to the Steam controllers, where the L2 and the R2 buttons would be their equivalents. So it just dawned on me. I did mention that the Steam controller has those extra sort of paddles on the back of the grips. Now that I think about it, those basically function as the L2 and the R, or the L3 and the R3, which are present on the DualShock. But you know what? I much rather like those, because if you're playing any shooters or you're playing any kind of heavy movement game, clicking down on those L3 and R3 buttons is kind of a pain in the ass. I'm not gonna lie. It's not an input that I've ever been a fan of. I don't like it, and it feels unnatural. So kudos to Steam for that one. And actually, there is a push down input on the Steam controller's joystick as well. Going forward, obviously, the buttons do feel a little mushy on the Steam controller. They're a little small. They're smaller than I want. They're smaller than the DualShock's front controllers. They're about the size of plain M&Ms, if that makes sense. Maybe a little smaller. I don't really know. It's been a while since I've had an M&M. Yeah, it feels okay. One thing I like about the DualShock 4 is it's got a nice weight to it. However, it's kind of a little small for your hands. So if you ever found that issue that the DualShock's a little small for your hands, I think the Steam controller will fit right in. I don't know how this will fare for smaller hands. However, Steam controller fits nicely in my hands. It has these nice ridges right underneath the bottom triggers or the L2 R2 placements that kind of rest your middle fingers on, which I'm assuming is what you would want those on, or even your ring fingers. It's a pleasant controller to use, at least right now. However, what I will say is if you're looking for just a standard controller, I would probably recommend the DualShock 4. I have not yet used the Steam controller, however, so I will be making a video on this. The main reason I did pick up the Steam controller was not only was it on sale, but the adaptability and the customizability of it is really what attracted me to it in the first place. Wanting to because if you know, while you can play a lot of games on controller on Steam, there's no real good replacement for that mouse button. So that's the main reason that attracted me to the Steam controller in the first place. Is if you're someone who likes to use a remote play with Steam or Steam Link, and you'll, like I have on my setup, I'll have my desktop running, and I'll have my crappy laptop or like a Chromebook or something hooked up to a TV in the living room, and you just want to play, but navigating the menus with the controller sucks. And while you can have the 6-axis as a pointer, it's kind of just unintuitive and not really an enjoyable experience. And if you want a wireless mouse and keyboard, then you just kind of find no place to comfortably put it on a couch environment. So the main reason I got a Steam controller was to fit that niche. I will do an extended review of it. I will try it out on multiple games that I play with controller. Namely, The Witcher 3 I play on controller. I just think it feels better. Any kind of tactical combat game like that. Tactical, lol, I know. The Witcher 3, Tree of Savior, a couple of MMOs that are controller compatible. Dark Souls. You know, these are games that I'll give out a try on this controller and see how I feel. See how this controller fares up to what it really does. But yeah, so the main appeal of this was if you like to couch game through Steam Link or using your PC, hopefully the experience with big picture Steam is much more enjoyable through this, because working through it with the controller is kind of a headache. So I'll test these out, and I'll come back and I'll let you guys know my thoughts later on in the video. But my first impressions here are, I like it, you know. The one joystick is a little odd, however, it's not too odd if you're familiar with the Dreamcast controller. One joystick's not odd, because I get that the other, essentially it's a touchpad, but it's also a joystick, and it's offset a little bit, almost like a reverse Xbox controller. It's not terrible to me though. It feels somewhat intuitive. I guess we'll find out. I'll play with it and I'll get back to you guys and let you know. Stay tuned for that extended review. Appreciate it, guys. Peace.